Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. For the last 3 weeks of 2025 and continuing into the early part of 2026, the Iranian regime of Ali Khamanei appeared to be tottering on the brink of demise. The tyrants of Tehran were reeling from both mass protests across the country and direct threats of American intervention. And then quite suddenly, the response to the crisis was placed on hold as a reassessment in Washington highlighted the fact that more military assets were needed in the area before an effective campaign of regime change could be successfully implemented. So does this conclude the play, or is it merely an intermezzo between acts, with the second act featuring U.S. military force against Khamenei and his henchmen soon to follow? Joining us to deliberate this matter include all the way from the United States, Professor Russell Berman, who formerly served as a senior advisor at the U.S. State Department's policy planning staff, currently the director of the Middle East and Islamic World Project at Hoover Institution. It's great to have you with us, Russell.
Thanks for the introduction, Jonathan. Look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. So do we. The second guest comes from Madrid, Spain. Dr. Rafael Bardaji, formerly Spain's national security advisor, currently the CEO of Worldwide Strategy. It's always a pleasure having you with us, Rafael.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan.
Absolutely. And last but certainly not least, our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, the Iranian topic is one of keen interest. Earlier today, we had Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu level a scathing warning to the Ayatollah regime not to take the adventurism in Israel's direction. That after Ayatollah Ali Khamanei stated that they do intend to attack both Israel and the United States for, quote unquote, being responsible for what we're seeing today in Iran, with mass protests still raging and the Ayatollah regime failing to really get things under control. But at the same time, we also hear IDF Chief of General Staff coming out and also stating that Israel is ready.
So one has to look at these statements both by Netanyahu and General Zamir in context. And last week, there was a report that President Putin has called both Netanyahu and the Iranian president and offered to mediate between the countries. And apparently, both Jerusalem and Tehran have voiced their interest, perhaps even commitments, not to preempt. And this is, of course, because this is a sort of the Cuban Missile Crisis paradigm, where each side is afraid that the other one will land the first blow, and therefore they rush into doing it themselves. And if you look at Netanyahu's statement, which you just quoted, he said, if you do it, we will respond, which means we will not initiate, which is a positive remark. Now, General Zamir went to the home front command, the rear front command, because there were reports that there are not enough anti-missile missiles in Israel, and that the Israeli population could be less protected than it was last June during the 12-day war. So his message was apparently directed at the domestic audience to reassure Israelis that there is enough of a supply, both of offensive munitions as well as defensive ones.
Which goes without saying at this point, since, obviously the number of projectiles in Israel's stores is one of the most secret type of data that would not be leaked to the press, which is an understatement at this point. Of course, you have your ways with things,
but the real race is not regarding the production of missiles either here or in the United States. but whether the Iranians, for the last 6 or 7 months, have managed to produce more ballistic missiles than Israel has stocked against those missiles.
Indeed. Well, in any event, we do know now that at least two aircraft carrier strike groups, to include the USS Abe Lincoln strike group and the USS George W. Bush, are heading towards the Middle East, to include one additional one that was not yet confirmed publicly, at least. With that being said, it seems like it's relatively quiet in Washington when it comes to the type of rhetoric, which usually indicates that President Trump might be concocting something. I think Jonathan Schanzer of the FDD coined the phrase "the fog of Trump" rather than the fog of war. But nonetheless, Dr. Bardahi, I'd like to hear your take on this. You also just published a interesting article with the headline 1-0 to Trump.
Yeah, correct. I think today is 1 year since he was in office for the second time. And I think if you take the assessment of this year, which we have been living fast enough, even for myself, which I try to follow all the events, I think at the end of the day, we have to accept that Trump has getting all or most of his goals, no, against the rest of the world. But anyway, talking about the goals in Iran, I think we need to put in perspective all the noise that has been in the press in the last few days, no? From the report that you mentioned about the stockpiles of Arrow 3 missiles, anti-missiles, rockets, to the conversation between Putin and the leaders of the region, also between Netanyahu and President Trump calling off an imminent attack. People thought that the attack was imminent a week ago, and overnight it dissipated. But we had some productive intelligence for that maneuver. I mean, we knew how the Iranians reacted and how much they moved around. And I have to say that after the June war, the capabilities to attack by Iran are really, really weakened. The Israelis and the Americans destroyed not only the nuclear facilities, but also, and more importantly, launchers, missiles production facilities, components, warheads. And I think it's fair to say that at least half of the launchers were destroyed. Also, you have to bear in mind the different system of ballistic missiles the Iranians have. Most of all the solid fuel missiles were incapacitated somehow, and what they have been producing lately are liquid fuel rockets, which needs up to 4 hours to get the fuel in the rocket to be launched. So with the proper intelligence, I think any air force in the region have time enough to counteract any movement by the ballistic missiles, long-range ballistic missiles, no, that could be directed both against Israel or the American facilities in the Gulf. No? So I think we should not exaggerate the Iranian ability to strike back. No? Having said that, it's still relevant, and everyone has to be prepared, but probably with more sophisticated and limited actions, the regime could be put again back in the ropes, as it were, with the demonstration in the last days.
Absolutely. Well, one word that really triggered my attention was with regard to somehow the ballistic or the solid fuel ballistic missiles failed to work was something to take note of. Obviously, somehow had a lot of hows and activities being implemented behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, when we're talking about the 12-day war or Operation Rising Line and the cherry on top, Operation Midnight Hammer by the Americans that followed, the Iranian long-range ballistic missiles with a capability of reaching Israel have suffered more than half. Some speak even about 3 quarters, which does speak about the severity of where the Iranians have plunged into. Many of the countries in the region were actually under the impression that Israel would lose that altercation, and this has really established a new paradigm that will put the Iranians in its place. Escalation dominance obviously was far below what Israel intended to utilize against the Iranians, so there is still many rabbits to take out of the hat, so to speak, for Israel, which the Iranians are not privy to from the 12 days in which Israel engaged it. But let's talk for a moment on the debate in Washington prior to the anticipated launch that everybody anticipated on Wednesday. Some say that the aircraft were already in the air, and this cost a lot of money to the U.S. military, and the calling it off is not taken lightly in this context. Professor Berman, I'd like to hear your take on the deliberation. It spanned between a surgical one-time strike that would grant the popular uprising a momentum versus a devastating strike to which, quite frankly, if you looked at the assets in the region, there was not enough out there.
Yeah. I think it's important to zoom out and identify several different lanes of analysis that are appropriate now. One is, and of course this is the most dramatic one, the prospect of a popular uprising leading to regime change in Iran. As much sympathy as one has for the legitimate for the demonstrators and their legitimate grievances, it's hard to think of examples where popular uprisings on their own have led to regime change. I wish them well, but they'll have to set a precedent. There's also, secondly, the regional security issues that Raphael has been discussing right now, and the distribution of assets across the region. I think that's been discussed sufficiently, but that is a separate matter, really. Third is, and this is, I come to your question now, Jonathan. What on earth will Washington do? Initially, President Trump approached very closely President Obama's red line discourse. If you do this, we will do that. He didn't quite get there, and he sort of backed up for that. And he said that he had information that the Iranians were not carrying out the killings that he imagined would trigger an American response. I don't know what kind of information he had, or whether this was a cover to allow him to step back. In the meantime, in terms of military assets, the United States was, as you know, very engaged in the Caribbean in the Venezuela matter, and this had reduced the presence in the Gulf. That is gradually changing. So what we don't know right now is whether the movement of U.S. assets into the region signal the aspiration to initiate some kind of hit. You described two extremes, Jonathan. There's a question to mind whether a hit will really facilitate regime change. What might facilitate regime change instead would be some kind of break in the leadership, some kind of revolt by the IRGC. I think there are legitimate concerns about what will come after Khameini. In some versions, it will be the son of the Shah who will lead to democratic elections. Great. In other versions, it would be a tough IRGC dictatorship. I'm sure this is holding back. This argument is raised by some in Washington. There's rare sympathy for Khameini, but there's a real concern about a chaos that might ensue in the wake of the collapse of the regime. So sympathy, solidarity even with the demonstrators against the dictatorship, but curiosity about what's going to come next.
Well, we're not prophets, at least around this table, and to know what's going to come up next is, establishing many contingencies. Try to be ready for whatever you can, and more than that is too much of an ask. But there are plenty of instances in history where decapitation were actually quite successful.
Well, it is perhaps time for another round of the Abraham Accords, but this time Abraham is Abraham Lincoln. So it's another version. One of the questions is, can President Trump back out of his warnings without losing face? And as we know, face in this region is very important. It is also important to Trump. Of course, he has other things on his plate. Greenland, he's going to Davos, he is going to engage with others, and he may simply delay his actions. And of course, this will probably influence his image around the world. So maybe he can find some one shot. And remember, in June, last June, the Iranians only responded by hitting Al Udeid airbase in Qatar and forewarned the Qataris so that no one will be hurt. If there is a back channel here, and we know that Steve Witkoff was apparently having some conversations either directly or through Oman, perhaps they will find some mechanism where the US will take out some Iranian assets, with the Iranians either not retaliating at all or only symbolically.
Well, obviously, he had a channel with Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran, that was also mentioned publicly,
Right.
alongside another channel through Switzerland, which is usually and historically, since 1979, the interlocutor for diplomatic ventures between the United States and Iran. Naturally, the Omani foreign minister did travel to
Right.
Tehran for a couple of meetings related to this, but we do see that there are a lot of issues related to the Ayatollah regime that are not necessarily very solvable at this point in time. What was is not what will be for the Ayatollah regime, irrespective of what happens. That was also a remark that Prime Minister Netanyahu has stated during an address to the Israeli parliament, or Knesset in Hebrew. Dr. Rafael Bardahi, your take on that? Is that indeed the new paradigm for this regime in Tehran?
Well, I think that the regime in Tehran is really doomed. I don't know how long it will take, how repressive they will be, but there are problems that they are not able to solve. Starting from the economic situation, it's dire and it's getting worse, and also dealing with natural catastrophes like the deep shortage of water, that is affecting everyone. Even they thinking moving the capital, Tehran, to another place just for the lack of water. So I think those are really deep problems that whatever you do or you don't, they are not able to solve it. So they will be still facing opposition and internal demonstrations. Secondly, if the Americans were able to do or replicate somehow what the Israeli did with the nuclear scientists during the June war, I think decapitation is an option. And if you see the case of Venezuela, one of the fears of the Americans were not to create a chaotic situation within the country, but to produce a slow transition from Maduro to something else, and more democratic in the future, I hope. So I think some people in Washington are also scared about the possibility of fragmentation of Iran. So trying to avoid that dramatic change could be an option. And in that scenario, I think the use of limited surgical strikes could help the opposition to start a transition period which at the end of the day will demise the whole regime of the Ayatollahs in the future.
Professor Berman?
I think another aspect that you may want to consider, Jonathan, is the politics in Washington. There's a range of positions within the Trump world, within the MAGA world, from the more isolationist that indeed includes, if not sympathy for Iran, strong ties to Qatar on the one hand. On the other hand, there's a side that is more consistent with President Trump's forward-leaning rhetoric about uh, uh, aligning with the demonstrators and taking down the regime. President Trump, since his previous administration, has been very, very critical of the regime. Uh, that's not the case for everyone in his entourage. Uh, all of this is playing out now in the forefront of the midterm elections. I think President Trump won in public opinion in the wake of the very surgical action in Venezuela. And I don't think he wants to go into the elections with a real hot war in Iran. If he can come out with a success, that's a big plus. But he's probably trying to figure out, as I said before, if Khamenei goes, what comes next?
According to various reports, obviously, the Turks, the Omanis, the Qataris, and the Saudis have really lobbied Washington not to launch such an attack. There was a lot of pressure coming from that direction, fearing the consequences for the region. There may be ripple effects, obviously, into those countries, which they would not want to deal with themselves. Of course, also having to do with their own strategic landscapes or policies in understanding that the Ayatollah regime collapsing is not necessarily in their own interest, which is also another point to be made. But with all that being said and done, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has mentioned that within days or weeks, the Ayatollah regime will collapse. We are drawing near to the end of the program, and I'd like to start with that point. Are we indeed in the last week of the weeks or days of the Ayatollah regime? Dr. Bakri, we'll start with you.
I think we are seeing the beginning of the end of the regime, definitely, because the internal contradictions are too big for them to be solved successfully. And because of that, internally, there will be pressure for changing the regime. I don't know how long, days, weeks, months, but I think the regime is doomed, definitely.
And looking forward in this context, what are we to expect from a regional perspective? Is there a certain course of action or development that you anticipate would potentially challenge the regime from rebouncing or reasserting its sovereignty over its hijacked country?
Well, the world is complex enough, no? But I think you look at Venezuela. Changing Maduro, getting Delcy under the boot of President Trump from Washington, is hurting Iran and it's hurting China as well. So they are really affecting the future of the regime. No, the main gasoline market from Iran was Venezuela. The main production of crude oil to Iran was from Venezuela. So I think that will even put in a much more dire economic situation for the Ayatollahs. No? And again, with China as well. No? So I think there are some ripple effects where not intended consequences of so many actions. But I think building the pressure, building the threat of putting tariffs to those who have anything to do with Iranians oil is pressing enough the regime to force the demonstration to move ahead and see what's happened. No? Definitely.
Professor Berman, same questions to you.
Well, again, the issue is what comes after. If it's a son of the Shah leading to democratic elections, bravo. If it's an IRGC dictatorship, that could actually provide the stability that the Saudis are looking for. You could have a regime in Tehran like MBS in Riyadh. Certainly not a democratic one, but one that is open to a certain kind of set of reforms. I think there are other regional considerations that we really haven't touched on regarding the fragmentation, domestic fragmentation. Reportedly, some of the severest opposition to the regime is coming from the Kurdish regions inside Iran. At the same time, you have what's happening in Syria. I am sure there are very interesting discussions going on right now in Erbil about what's happening in Syria and what's happening in Iran. That's a different perspective than one will get in Washington. It's certainly not on the top of the list of Washington's concerns, but that is, I think, the Kurdish question is going to reemerge with vengeance in the coming year or two.
Mr. Oren?
The regime, just like any other regime, wants to survive. And if what is necessary to survive is to change its policy, it will reluctantly do it. And what it has to do in order to survive is get the sanctions lifted. For that, it needs a dialogue with the United States. And even though Khamenei is dead set against it, he will have to let someone do it. Now, he's as far away from a Gorbachev as possible. He is more like a Brezhnev or a Chernenko. But perhaps the next leader will have to do what Gorbachev did in the Soviet Union.
Well, and we also know what was the fate of Gorbachev, which he is also taking into account naturally. But to put things quite frankly, Ayatollah Ali Khamanei doesn't know much beyond the boundaries of Iran. He is understanding his own world and the RGC individuals advising him and the councils are feeding him with selective information, obviously.
Doesn't he watch Jerusalem Studio?
Well, go figure. Maybe he sees a quote or two, but nonetheless, taking things into account, he does not understand America, he does not understand Europe, and he does not understand Israel. And the far-reaching consequences for his actions will mark history. And we are at a very crucial pivot here. We will deliberate more on this in the near future, I'm sure. With that, I'd like to thank Dr. Bardahi and Professor Berman for all of your valuable insights. I'd like to thank Mr. Amir Oren.
Thank you.
And to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, Shalom from Jerusalem.
For more of TV7 Israel's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.